The Firm, India's only show on corporate law, tax and audit matters.
Hello and welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, it's a stamp duty shocker for consortium transactions. And are companies taking shareholders for granted when it comes to related party transactions? Last week, the Supreme Court delivered a stamp duty shocker for consortium financing arrangements. It said that in such deals, stamp duty is applicable on individual transactions. Here's the backstory. Coastal Gujarat Power is an SPV set up by Tata Power for the Mundra Ultra Mega Power Project. It secured consortium financing from 13 lenders with SBI as the appointed lead trustee or security trustee. Coastal Gujarat Power executed a mortgage agreement with SBI and paid 4,21,000 as stamp duty on it. But the Gujarat Revenue Authority claimed a total stamp duty payable at 54,62,000 rupees. Revenue argued that the forming of a consortium and a single mortgage deed instead of several distinct instruments of mortgage was done to evade stamp duty. The Gujarat High Court disagreed with Revenue. It held that stamp duty is payable on instruments and not on transactions. But the Supreme Court has set aside the High Court decision. It said the mortgage agreement can safely be regarded as 13 distinct transactions. It has ordered Coastal Gujarat Power to pay the deficit 50 lakh rupees of stamp duty. Now, the amounts involved may not seem substantial, but this decision will have significant bearing on all such consortium deals. To talk about that, I have with me M R Umarji, former Chief Legal Advisor at the IBA, and Ashwin Ramanathan of AZB. To both of you, a warm welcome. Mr. Umarji, how do you assess this Supreme Court decision? Do you agree at how the Supreme Court has arrived at this final outcome?
Basically, you see, the stamp duty is a tax on a document.
Right.
So, there could be a situation where there are mortgage by deposit of title deeds which are created without executing any document. Now, no stamp duty is payable. There is a transaction of transfer of interest in a immovable property, but no document is executed, so no stamp duty is paid.
Correct.
Now, since it is a tax on a document, the transactions which I have undertaken behind that document, namely in this case there were 13 lenders, so therefore 13 documents should have been deemed to have been executed, is not correct, because you can't look at the transaction, you have to look at the document, and document was only one. The property on which mortgage was created was only one. The borrower was only one. So therefore, there is no question of treating it as a multiple transaction.
But the document does represent 13 different agreements or sets of agreements, right?
True, but then it is mortgage created is in favor of. There could be a joint documentation, there could be a transfer of property which is in favor of 3 persons, and that doesn't require a joint ownership of property is permissible. Similarly, a joint lending, this is a long-standing practice which is prevailing in the banking industry.
I'm glad you said that. It's a long-standing practice, Ashwin, and yet, you have Revenue arguing that in fact consortium financing is actually a device to evade stamp duty.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Menaka. I agree with everything that Mr. Umarji said. In fact, I would actually go one step further to say not only is it not, not only obviously there aren't sort of 13 different agreements to create mortgage, there is only one. I would actually go on to argue that there is actually just one transaction of mortgage. It's just that there are 13 beneficiaries of that transaction through the security trustee. And I think that's really important because, just segueing into the last point that you made about the fact that it's a long-standing practice, it absolutely is very much long-standing practice for consortium lending, but there are several lenders involved with varying degrees of exposure, that security is always created in favor of one centralized agency who then sort of, manages and administers the security interest on behalf of all of the lenders. And I think in that sense, the Supreme Court decision has probably raised more questions than answers in terms of, well, this is the decision for this particular case, but what of all of the cases that have followed exactly the same practice for literally, decades now.
Yeah, fair enough. And, whether we agree or disagree with how the Supreme Court arrived at it, this is now the final word, so it seems. So, Ashwin, can you sort of outline what do you think the scope of impact of this decision is going to be? Is Revenue going to pick up the principle articulated by the Supreme Court here and apply it to multiple different situations, not just of consortium financing?
I think, there are parallels to be drawn here between what happens in the case of consortium financing like this and what happens in the case of, debentures. Now, non-convertible debentures are a popular method of financing, have actually gained in popularity over the past few years, in no small part, by the way, to the efforts of both SEBI and RBI to try and deepen the corporate bond market. So they're a popular instrument. It is absolutely the norm that a debenture trustee is always appointed in cases of debenture issuances, and the fact that security is created in favor of the debenture trustee. Now, the debenture trustee obviously holds the security for the benefit of all of the debenture holders. In a public issue of debentures, there could literally be thousands of debenture holders. And then, do you stretch the logic in this of this judgment to then apply to that kind of a situation and say that, literally that one document of mortgage or one document of pledge, whatever security has been created in favor of the debenture trustee, whether that now actually constitutes or should be regarded as actually thousands of different creations of security, which I think may be going a bit too far, but I can't see how the logic of this judgment doesn't apply equally or doesn't translate equally into the debenture situation.
So this is in a sense opening Pandora's box, according to you?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, what is the resolution then to this? Because if the scope of impact is as wide as the two of you have discussed, then how do you resolve this? Because it's clear this applies across the country, even though this was a matter in Gujarat.
Yeah. On the one hand, the states need to look at this and examine the issue and try to keep the stamp duty rates at a moderate level. Because you see, it will impact every state governments have been relying on stamp duty as a major source of revenue, and it is impacting the entrepreneurship in the country.
Right.
Now, in a case like this, where 4 lakhs has become 54 lakhs, the company will have to think in terms of recovering that cost by increasing the tariff or by some other means. It will ultimately affect the consumer. So therefore, the state government has to bear in mind that credit is the driving force of the economy. As far as legally the right of the union government is concerned, there is an entry in the concurrent list which refers to stamp duty other than rates of stamp duty.
Okay.
Now, in exercise of this power of in the concurrent list, in 2-3 laws, the central government has declared exemption from stamp duty.
Okay.
One recent one is of Factoring Regulation Act, where assignment of receivables in favor of a factor, which is exclusively otherwise within the purview of the states, has been given exemption.
Okay.
No stamp duty can be levied.
Are you suggesting, sir, that a similar exemption must be extended to consortium financing?
Central government will have a power to do that, at least in case of debentures and some such instruments which are issued to the public.
And what does that entail? It entails just a legislative change or more than just a legislative change?
A legislative change.
A legislative change. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Ashwin, solutions? Are there ways to structure out of this? How are your clients responding to this? How do we get out of what the Supreme Court has created for us?
Well, I mean, I think the clients are responding quite anxiously, as you might imagine. It's not a happy situation. Trying to structure around it while the jury's out on sort of what kind of structures might be acceptable. I think it's important to make the point that this was the structure that was devised in order to reduce the impact of stamp duty. I wouldn't say it was evasion of stamp duty. It is certainly avoiding stamp duty, and there are well-settled Supreme Court decisions, particularly in the context of fiscal and taxing statutes, that actually say that adopting structures that minimize taxes is perfectly legal as long as it doesn't amount to evasion. And I think that's really the point over here, is was there a genuine attempt to evade stamp duty? It was clearly sort of in keeping in conformity with market practice as has been established over a period of several years now. And B is it basically did actually adopt a structure whereby only one document was required to be executed. The impact, unfortunately, of the judgment is it disregards a trust as a single, or the trustee on behalf of a trust as a single counterparty, and looks through the trustee to the actual beneficiaries of the trust. There are at least a couple of other examples where similar trusts operate, on the same principles, mutual funds being one. And all mutual funds are set up as trusts with a whole lot of investors standing behind. A transaction with a mutual fund simply cannot be regarded as a transaction with all of the individuals that are beneficiaries of that mutual fund. So I think it's still too early to say if there are any structures that can withstand, the impact of the judgment. I think there's a very little, technically speaking, the judgment is rendered in relation to the Bombay Stamp Act as applicable to Gujarat.
Correct.
There are other states that have different Stamp Acts, and there's the Indian Stamp Act itself. Neither of those are directly impacted by the judgment, but that said, the same language appears in all of those Stamp Acts as well. So at the very least, this judgment is going to have highly persuasive, if not binding effect on all other courts as well, and therefore all other states. So for the time being, I think it may be a little too early to sort of talk about alternative structures. There may be none, frankly, given that the whole trust structure was the way that had been devised by industry, by market participants several years ago to mitigate the stamp duty issue.
Okay, so effectively what you're telling me, Ashwin, is that companies have to just prepare to pay for more, because since the Gujarat Revenue Department has had success with this, it won't be too much to suggest that many other state revenue departments will also seek to apply this very same principle in consortium financing, at least to begin with right now. And therefore companies ought to prepare to pay a lot more stamp duty than they earlier were when they work with groups of lenders.
Absolutely, and until sort of reliable structures can be come up with to sort of counter this effect, I think companies have to sort of be prepared to just lump it and bear the higher cost.
So all the states will try to get more revenue by applying this judgment, and it will. I am also worried that what will happen to the past cases.
Oh, you think they might in fact start retrospectively applying this?
There is nothing like retrospective. It's just an interpretation of the law. Section 5, which was interpreted in the Gujarat Bombay Stamp Act, is similarly worded. Section is there in a Indian Stamp Act, which is of 1899.
Right.
So the law is always there.
All right. Thank you for adding to the list of bad news. Mr. Umarji, Ashwin, thank you very much for joining us. On that note, we'll take a quick break on the firm, but coming up next, are companies taking shareholders for granted when it comes to related party transactions?